Today's episode of the Hockey Variety Podcast is brought to you by fartbetcasino.fun, your number one betting website and app for NHL, MLB, NFL, Liga, and Pakistani League cricket. We have all of your betting needs. We got Vegas odds, we got Atlantic City odds, Toronto, Moose Jaw, that casino that's just outside of Calgary on the reservation with the very good buffet. We've got all of your betting needs at fartbetcasino.fun. If you ever wanted to bet on how many times your team hits the post during a game, we got that. If you ever wanted to bet on how many times your coach farts during a hockey game, we've got that. We've even got post-game betting as well, where you make your bets after the game's already done. We've got it all. So head over to fartbetcasino.fun for all of your betting needs. And thank you again for sponsoring this video. Okay, welcome to the Hockey Variety Podcast. Big shout out to fartbetcasino.net, or .fun rather. Oh man, I might lose my sponsorship for saying that. Happy Sunday. It's just afternoon here on Sunday. I just played some drop-in hockey, as I usually do Sunday mornings. Oh man. So, first of all, it's like minus 20 here. Not that cold. Okay, not that cold, you know. Especially for a part of the country that, this is North life. Oh, we can handle this. And then you go to drop in hockey and there's only like 10 guys there because it's too cold. Oh no. Boo-hoo. So we played 4-on-4. My team didn't have a spare the first half of the game. The other team did. And then thankfully one of the guys switched teams halfway so we could finally get a break. But yeah, that was crazy. My legs are just on fire right now. That was just an hour of straight hockey. Thankfully, we had two goalies, though, so we could actually make a game out of it. But yeah, no, not a bad Sunday hockey, I must say. But yeah, no, it's just insane, the turnout. Like, whenever it's kind of cold, there isn't a good turnout. I don't get it, but whatever. Anyways, I had a lot of fun doing the podcast yesterday. Saturday edition. If you haven't checked that out, please do. I talk a little bit about maybe what goes through players' minds when they hit unrestricted free agency. So check that out if you haven't already. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. I have a Facebook page now. I have a Facebook page for the podcast, just straight up called Hockey Variety Podcast. I tried to search it on my personal account, but the algorithm doesn't cooperate. So I don't know. Maybe if we get enough followers, we'll move up the algorithm. Who knows, right? And we also have an Instagram page now as well, Hockey Variety Podcast. I'll probably be a bit more active on there. I'm a little bit more of an Instagram guy than a Facebook guy, personally. So if you have not followed the Instagram page, please do so. Please do show. Hope to post some memes. Of course, I'll post new episodes of the podcast there, so check it out. Yeah. Got a nice little episode in store for you guys today. We're going to talk a little bit about the 2020 playoffs. If you remember that, you might be trying to forget that whole year, but I'm looking forward to talking about that and just kind of reflecting on that whole just craziness. Yeah, and then we're also going to talk about gambling in hockey. Seemed very fitting now that I have this new sponsor, fartbetcasino.fun. Check it out if you haven't already. There's an app. You can head to the website as well. We're going to be talking about gambling in hockey and, what place does it have in the sport today? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? We'll get into that later. And then I have a fantasy pick to wrap up today's episodes. Yeah, looking forward to it. Might try to get one in the middle of the week this week. We'll see. Try to space them out a bit more. But, life's been busy. That's how it is. So, yeah. Okay, let's talk about the 2020 playoffs. Oh, I just noticed my screen sharing cut things off. Hang on a sec. There we go. Okay, cool. Hopefully I got everything in there. So, because, there's a lot to unpack here. The 2020 playoffs. Yeah, 2020, what a year. What just a crazy year. And it's weird. I'll see and hear ads these days, and they'll still talk about, how last year was so crazy. They'd be like, oh man, 2022. Thankfully that's over with. And it's like, really? I kind of enjoyed 2022. It was nice. Things are opening back up. I got engaged. My hockey team won a championship. I got a new job I really like. It was a nice year. What are you talking about, you know? So it's just kind of weird that's still sort of a trend of people being like, oh, last year, oh, thank goodness that's over. But I think we can all agree 2020 was pretty crazy for most people. I personally had a pretty good 2020. I met my fiance that year. I was having some career problems, and I got back on my feet that year too. And then we were also blessed with the 2020 playoffs that year as well. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, in case you forgot, because you're trying to put this year in the past and never want to think about it again, well, I'm making you relive 2020 a little bit. So, here's the scoop. So, before the whole world shut down in March of 2020, the NHL was doing their season as usual. And most teams got to like the 68, 69, quit laughing, 70, 71 game mark, right? Like just over 10 games left for most teams. And then everything shut down. And they couldn't continue the season. They had to end things. Yeah. So we're left on a cliffhanger here. Who's going to win the Stanley Cup? Is there going to be a Stanley Cup? We know a lot of sports leagues didn't proceed with awarding a championship, at least from what I can remember. But eventually, when the summer came around, the NHL saw this as an opportunity like, hey, maybe we can make something work. So what they did, they had two bubbles, right? They had the Edmonton bubble for the West teams and the Toronto bubble for the Eastern Conference teams. And how they decided who makes the playoffs, well, there was a lot of teams just kind of on the cusp of the playoffs, and they didn't want to immediately kind of kick them out of the playoffs because they were really close when the season shut down. Some of them were even on the upswing, and they probably would have made the playoffs if things didn't get shut down. So what the NHL did is they pretty much made a 24 team playoff. Now I know officially they say, oh, but the qualifying round doesn't count as the playoffs, but I think now that a few years have passed, I think it's safe to say it was a straight up 24 team playoff. And that's okay. You know, the NHL had to do what they had to do to make the playoffs fair. And I think this was fair. I think the NHL did everything right in 2020. Okay. I do. Maybe they could have made it a bit more enjoyable of an experience for the teams in the bubble, but I digress. I think they did a pretty good job, and I don't think there was really any COVID cases during that whole thing, which is a huge success because one case in the bubble could maybe lead to the whole thing getting shut down. So I think it was a success for the NHL, personally. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, last episode, I'm so sorry about all the popping sounds. I am looking at getting a new mic. I might even see if my boss can hook me up with one for work, so I can use that for the podcast. We'll see. Sorry, back to 2020. So, oh boy. So what they did is they took the top 4 teams in, just make sure I got this right. They took the top 4 teams in each conference. And if I am reading this correctly, I believe those teams in the West were Vegas, Colorado, Dallas, St. Louis. And then in the East, the top 4 teams, this is not in order, by the way. There's Philly, Tampa, Washington, and Boston. And then there was 8 teams that had to duke it out in the qualifying round. So there's 8 teams in each conference, and they pretty much did a little mini first round, best of 5, to basically earn a playoff spot. I think that was the best way to go, and I think that was the most fair way to go. Now, for some people that think like, oh man, Montreal getting in the playoffs, what a joke, right? Oh, Chicago, they shouldn't have been in the playoffs, what a joke. Well, here's the thing. None of those teams that like would have missed the playoffs, none of them got out of the first round, the official first round. And if you ask me, Long story short, Tampa won the Stanley Cup. I think the right team won the Stanley Cup. I think most people would agree with that. And even with Dallas, I mean, it was a Cinderella story. Yes, it was the Hudobin show, but I think the right team made the finals as well, really. I think it made for good TV, especially since a lot of us were at home, not doing much, and a lot of pretty crazy stuff happened in this playoff. So let's get into each series really quick. Okay, so to determine the seeding for those top 4 teams that made it, they did a little bit of a mini tournament that no one really cared about, and that's how Philly got the first seed because they won that little mini tournament. Boston lost the little mini tournament, so that's how they finished in the 4th seed. It's a little confusing, but I don't think that part of it's a big deal. It's the qualifying round that people really cared about. So when the regular season wrapped up or got canceled or whatever, the 5th place team in the East was Pittsburgh, and the 12th place team was Montreal. 5 played 12, 6 played 11, 7 played 10, 8 played 9. Same thing in the West. So Montreal beat Pittsburgh 3-1. Big upset. It was very much the Carey Price show. Big surprise, Carey Price. Yeah, and then the next year, Carey Price taking the Habs on all the way to the finals. Really sad to see that his career is probably over. What an absolute legend, Hall of Famer. It was nice to see him really make Montreal relevant when they were probably going to miss the playoffs this year. And then we had Carolina versus New York. This is kind of a sad one. This was Lundqvist's final shot at it, really. Lundqvist played all 3 games, I believe, and he couldn't get a win. It was tough to watch, really. This is one of the greatest goalies of my generation. This is his final kick at the can, and they get swept by Carolina, and Carolina's just a better team at the time. They're a better team now. Yeah, it was a little bit of a bummer, especially as a fan of Lundqvist, but that's how sports work, right? The Islanders beat Florida. I don't have too much to say on that. The Islanders were the better team. That's pretty much it. Toronto-Columbus, this is probably the most talked about series looking back at it. And I think kind of for the wrong reasons. I've said this on the podcast before. People saying that Toronto blew it. Oh, Toronto played so bad. But no. Jonas Korpisalo was unreal this year. He was. He really helped this Columbus team overperform. I'm a Columbus fan myself. Korpisalo was unreal. He is the reason why the Leafs lost. And Merzlikins wasn't bad either. He played, I think, a game or 2, and he was good too. It was Columbus's goaltending that won that series. I don't think it's Toronto blowing it. I don't think people are giving Columbus enough credit for that series. They played good, and their goalies were spectacular. So that's my opinion on it. But I know Toronto, they can't get it done when it matters, and I get it. I get it, but I think this year, this was more Columbus being good than Toronto being bad, if you ask me. Okay, in the West, we had Edmonton being upset by Chicago, Edmonton being the 5th seed going into the playoffs, and Chicago being the 12th seed. This was more so, I think, Edmonton blowing it. We talk about Toronto blowing it in these playoffs, but I think Edmonton really blew it in this one, personally. So, yeah. Arizona beat Nashville. That was a great series. I watched a lot of that. Darcy Kemper, just an absolute legend this year. More on them later. But yeah, nice upset. I was really happy for the Yotes. And maybe this kind of blew their chances at getting a top pick, but who cares? It was a fun run. If you even want to call it a run, we'll get to that. But yeah, very happy for the Coyotes. That was a really fun series to watch. It was pretty close too. I know it was 3-1, but those were tight games. Vancouver beat Minnesota. I honestly don't have too much to say about that. I honestly don't think I caught too much of that series, but obviously the big thing was, Markstrom playing really good, and then he got hurt and Demko filled in later in the playoffs. So yeah, good on Vancouver. And then Calgary and Winnipeg, another tight series, I thought. Calgary wins 3-1. Always great seeing 2 Canadian teams duke it out, especially those Western Conference teams. It doesn't really matter which two Western Canadian teams it is. It's always like just a dogfight. So that was a great series. I would have been happy either way on the result of that one. So yeah. Oh, and you might have noticed the Sharks didn't make it. Yeah, the Sharks, they were one of the bottom 7 teams in the league. Anyways, okay, first round. So the lowest seed coming out of the qualifying round played the winner of that little mini tournament. So Montreal played Philly. That was actually a pretty tight series, I thought. I was kind of like, oh, Philly's probably going to pull it off, but Carey Price, he's a good goalie. He made something out of it. Tampa beat Columbus. That was probably the most entertaining series of the first round. Again, depends who you ask. That Vancouver St. Louis one was very good too, but Tampa Columbus. And this was a pretty meaningful series because it's a rematch of the first round the previous season, when we all know Tampa Bay, historic season, gets swept in the first round by Columbus. So they have the rematch in the COVID bubble, and Tampa, they get the job done this time. Game 1 of that series, one of the longest games in NHL history. I remember I pretty much forced my fiance, my then girlfriend, and I pretty much forced her to watch the whole game. We started watching the game around lunchtime, and then we were having dinner together, and the game was still on. Like, it was pretty crazy. Again, Jonas Korpisalo, just insane. I really wanted Columbus to win that game 1, but the better team won, and that's just how the series went. Tampa was a better team. That's how it is. Korpisalo, man, he really made a name for himself in these playoffs, I thought, but the better team won. Washington Islanders, I honestly can't remember that one too much, but this is what Washington does. They blow it in the first round. So there you go. Boston, Carolina. Okay, so these teams, as of today, they're the 2 top teams in the East right now in this season. And these guys have met 3 out of the last 4 playoffs. There's a playoff rivalry here. And you think in the 2023 playoffs this year, we might see these 2 teams duke it out in the Eastern Conference Finals again. I know in this 2020 season, or this 2020 playoffs, they met in the first round, but was it 2019 they met in the East Finals too? There's a rivalry here between Boston and Carolina, and I'm all for it. These are 2 of the best teams in the league, arguably the 2 best teams in the league right now. And they're actually playing today. They're playing later on today at 2:00. So hopefully I get this podcast done by then, because yeah, I'm definitely watching that one. That should be a great game. But anyways, Boston pulled off the victory. What can you say? It could go either way. The 2 very good teams. Vegas and Chicago in the West. Vegas was the winner of that little mini tournament in the West. Chicago, big underdogs. Usually the underdogs don't pull it off. So yeah, no surprise there, really. This is a team that probably wouldn't have made the playoffs if it was a regular year. So there you go. Oh boy, Colorado, Arizona. So I watched game 4 and 5 of this series, and in the qualifying round, Arizona, Nashville, great series. Really happy for the Coyotes. And then in the first round, they play a real team. I don't want to say a real team, but they play a really good team in Colorado. And Darcy Kemper, game 1, 2, and 3, it's the Kemper show. He just keeps the Coyotes in there. And then game 4 and 5, Colorado is just okay, this is cute, but we're gonna do what we do. And it was just 2 blowouts. It was just insane. I've never seen a team just totally blow it in 2 games like that. It was nuts. It was 2 absolute butt kickings. Kemper just could not get the job done, and it was just, yeah, the better team definitely won. But it was just insane. It was such a nice story in the qualifying round, and then nope. So yeah, that was kind of funny. Sorry for the Coyotes, but this happens in the playoffs. I don't know. Dallas and Calgary, very good series once again. I think there's a few overtime matchups in there. I thought that was a really good series. I remember it being frustrating too, like Calgary just underperforming that year. So Dallas moves on, and Vancouver St. Louis. That was a great series. I remember, like many Canadians, I was definitely rooting for Vancouver. More on that later. Markstrom was great. Not really too much more to say. Really good series. Okay, second round, Philly Islanders. Islanders win in 7. Might have been a bit closer than it should have been. I don't know. Carter Hart really made a name for himself in these playoffs, so he really, yeah. Oh, you might have noticed too, now that we've hit the second round, none of those teams that would have missed the playoffs are left. So I think kind of like systemically, or whatever the word is, I think this kind of shows like, okay, so teams like Montreal and Chicago, they weren't able to get it done. And I think it's safe to say now, like the right teams are succeeding, and thus this format worked for this year. Okay. They should never do this again, but they did what they had to. So anyways, yeah, Islanders win. Bit of an upset, but this team also went to the, they went to the East Finals the following year. But either way, they're a good playoff team at this point. They move on. Tampa, Boston, always great to see these two teams duke it out. Tampa goes on to win the Stanley Cup this year, which means they obviously beat Boston. So there you go. Vegas and Vancouver. This is definitely the talk of the second round, if you ask me. I'll get to the last series in a sec. But yeah, Markstrom gets hurt. Demko goes in, and Demko's an absolute legend for 3 games. He just, oh man, that game 7, it was just like Vegas was so much better. And Demko is just doing every single thing he can to keep the Canucks in the playoffs. It was nuts. It was a very impressive performance by Demko. But the better team won. And I say the better team won because Vegas was easily the better team in that series. But Thatcher Demko making a name for himself from not even a full series, like 3 games. So there you go. And then Colorado Dallas. What a series. This was a great series. The story of this being Colorado's number 1 and number 2 goalies get hurt. Michael Hutchinson goes in, and he's kind of like a meme at this point because he wasn't good in Toronto, and you know how it is in Toronto. But if like they don't perform well in Toronto, I thought Hutchinson played pretty good actually in relief, but this series went to Game 7 overtime. Kivi Ranta completing the hat trick. He becomes a folk hero from the series, I think. He's never been able to live up to that, unfortunately, but what a game, that Game 7. That was great. And I'm rooting for Dallas at this point, too, so yeah. East Finals, we had the Islanders and Tampa. Great series. Always good seeing these two duke it out. The better team won, but it was a war. Vegas and Dallas, I honestly don't remember the series too much, but Dallas, they got the job done. Hudobin, just fantastic goalie throughout these playoffs. Really making a name for himself. So yeah, Stanley Cup Finals, Tampa, Dallas. It wasn't really that close. I know it went to 6, but I don't think many people doubted Tampa throughout. The big story being, I can't remember, it was Game 1 or Game 2, but Steven Stamkos came back for like 1 or 2 shifts, scores a goal. Stamkos was hurt throughout these playoffs, and then he played a little bit. He gets on the score sheet, and then he realized that his body just can't handle this yet. So, and I think Tampa was kind of rallying around him throughout these playoffs too. And the better team won. And like, when you can get the job done without one of your best players, arguably their best player, I wouldn't say he is, but he's a very important part of that team. And they got the job done without him, which just tells you how much depth Tampa has. How much they had during this run and how much depth they still have today. Just a very, very impressive Stanley Cup victory. They obviously do it again the next season. The right team won. And it was cool seeing Dallas going on a run. It was cool to see a few teams going on little mini runs like Vancouver, like Arizona, I guess. It was a good playoffs, I thought, really. And again, if you're at home, whether you're in quarantine or you're social distancing or whatever, if you're at home and you want to watch hockey all day, this was a successful playoffs, I think. We will never see anything like this again. I sure hope we don't. Knock on wood. Um, yeah, because this was just crazy. I personally kind of preferred this craziness to the divisions they had the following playoffs when COVID was still complicating things. But yeah, 2020 playoffs, very memorable for me. I don't think it gets talked about enough because people are trying to push it aside. But totally crazy year. Congrats to Tampa, two-time Stanley Cup champion. Well, I guess that was their second and third, if you count 2004. But they went to the finals the next year, they went to the finals against Colorado last season. There we go. And I don't know, maybe they'll do it again this year. They're a very good team. They've got one of, if not the best goalie in the league. Hedman winning the Conn Smythe during this 2020 playoffs. It could have gone to Point. It could have gone to Vasilevsky. It really could have gone to a few guys. But, Hedman was fantastic, really. He had a ton of goals, I think. You don't see too many blue liners putting up a lot of goals. So, yeah, really fun playoffs. Let's move on. All right, let's talk about gambling in hockey. So you might have noticed this past season, how do you not notice? Like, it doesn't matter which broadcast you're watching. It doesn't matter. Maybe you're on the NHL site. Most hockey podcasts these days, it's all about gambling this year. So I didn't really look too much into this, but it sounds like some of the laws have changed and the NHL is full on with allowing gambling to be advertised and in a sense kind of promoting it themselves as well. It's getting promoted by the NHL. It's getting promoted by broadcasters. And then they're obviously sponsoring things like podcasts, probably some YouTube channels, including mine. Okay, don't forget fartbetcasino.fun. Check it out. But I was a little hesitant to talk about this in the podcast. And the reason why is I felt like I needed to I needed to kind of understand the perspective of others, I guess. I don't gamble. I'm never gonna gamble at all. And that's just not for me. And I think I needed to learn that it's okay for people to gamble if this is their choice. I think I was just being a little too judgmental to really have an unbiased conversation with myself on this podcast. So I feel like I'm ready to talk about that now. So that's what I'm going to do. I really don't have like one side on whether this is good for the sport or whether this is bad for the sport. Because I see both sides. And this might be a bit of a surprise, but when it comes to the NHL as a business, I think promoting gambling in the sport is a good thing. Yeah, kind of crazy. Hear me out though. Like many organizations, sports organizations and whatnot, the pandemic had a huge financial hit. Like the NHL lost tons of revenue during that lost season. Not lost season, but that canceled season, the playoffs getting delayed. Like many big organizations, there's a big financial hit. And now that things are getting kind of normal again, the NHL needs to do what they can to make up for some of those losses. That includes gambling. That includes ads on jerseys, ads on helmets, digital ads. I think these are all good for NHL, the business, okay? And I'm saying that because is it good for the fandom? Is it ethical to be promoting those? I think that's where you have the debate. But if we're talking strictly about the NHL making money, this is a good thing for the business, okay? I'll talk more about all the other factors too, but I think this is a good thing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about my experiences with gambling. So, how I kind of see it myself, and again, I'll try not to let my own personal biases kind of come in, but I see gambling as more of like a substance, right? Like something that can kind of be abused and can be dangerous and can obviously have a big impact on someone's life. We saw this with Evander Kane. I talked about this 2 episodes ago, how a gambling addiction really had a serious impact on his life. And, as someone who has, there's quite a history of addiction in my family. So I'm always very skeptical about anything that could ruin your life if it gets out of hands. And I kind of categorize gambling in that too. Now, there are a few exceptions in my own life. First of all, the 50-50s. So if you don't know what a 50-50 is at like a sporting event or something like that, pretty much how it works is you pay, I don't know, $10, $20 for some number of tickets, and half of the money goes towards the winner. Okay, so whoever wins this draw wins half of the pot. And then the other half of the pot either goes back to the sports team or maybe it gets donated to a charity. Half of what is received from buying the tickets goes towards a positive cause. Okay, this doesn't go back into some casino's pockets or whatever. This goes back to the sports team or to the children's hospital or whatever. And I don't really see that too much as gambling because at least I know half of what I spent is going to something positive. So it feels more like a donation in a sense. I think that's a bit different, personally. And I like doing that mostly because I know that I'm supporting a good cause whether I win or lose. And if I win, cha-ching, awesome, right? I remember the when I was living up north, the Legion up north would do something similar. It's called the meat draw. So pretty much it's kind of 50-50, except half of it goes towards the Legion. So there's your donation part of it. And then half of it goes towards buying pretty much the meat that people are betting on. It sounds kind of silly, but I thought it was a lot of fun. And again, it's going towards a good cause. So I'm totally on board. So where I'm coming from, I don't gamble. I've got friends that do, and I'm learning to respect that decision. These are smart guys. They are responsible. And I understand that you can gamble responsibly, but it's just a bit overwhelming when you see all the ads and stuff. And I don't know if there's enough of a conversation that this could get out of hand. But then again, like we see alcohol ads all the time, and there isn't always that conversation about that getting out of hand. Maybe not as much as there should be. So is it really that different from that? Like, I don't drink either, and I don't really get annoyed by alcohol ads. So maybe I need to learn how to get used to that with the gambling side of things. But it's definitely kind of annoying if you don't gamble. I've talked to people about this before. It's kind of like, okay, but once again, this is good for the NHL, the business, okay? And making up for some of those losses during the pandemic. Okay, so what else do I have on my little agenda here? So, yeah, exactly. Why I think it's a good thing. It's good for the NHL. Yeah. Now, why it might be a bad thing? Again, that conversation I don't think it's being talked about enough. And when we see gambling being promoted across all major sports, we're going to see more people experience a gambling addiction. And then we're going to eventually kind of see how that impacts people, how that impacts people's lives, right? Like, the more people that gamble, the more people are going to have a problem or have a gambling problem themselves. So that I think is the main bad thing. Here's something I want to talk about though. And I think this is a little funny. So I'm going to call out Spit and Chicklets a bit here. So I've been listening to Spit and Chicklets for 3 years, maybe. And somewhere along the line, they went full-blown gambling. And I thought it was really annoying at first. I'm starting to get used to it. I think they've toned it down a bit, which is good. But one thing I don't get is people that are essentially kind of promoting themselves as good at gambling. So, you'll see like Merle Z And even kind of Ryan Whitney too on the podcast, where they basically, they come across as that they're good at gambling and that they know the right picks and this and that. But here's the question: are you genuinely good at gambling, or are you lucky? Right? Because unless like no bet is ever a guarantee, right? So if you're hitting a lot of your bets, then you're probably just lucky, really. And most people aren't lucky. And that's the main reason why I don't gamble is I don't want to take that risk with my money because like as long as gambling is overall less than a 50% chance of winning, which it is, those numbers just don't make sense to me. Why gamble when I can just have my money, right? And on top of that, I mean, I got my fiance too. She'd be very upset if I gambled. If I gambled $100 and I lost that, which statistically you probably do, you might get some of that back. But if you bet $100 on something, you're probably going to lose. She would be very upset with me, and I'd be very upset with myself. Right? It's we don't have like kids or anything. If we did, I'd be putting money I could dedicate towards them at risk as well. It just doesn't make sense, especially when there's safer investments out there. Go talk to your bank. There are investments that there is a more than 50% chance they will go through. You can invest in things like real estate, which is a very low risk gamble. I think there's just better ways you can gamble your money than going through these betting sites and all that, unless we're talking about fartbetcasino.fun. That is the only exception. That is the best gambling platform, and you should go check that out. So here's a question too: can we go back? Right? Like, is this going to be temporary? Is this just while the NHL makes up for some of their losses, or is this going to stick around for a long time? I don't think we can go back. I think now that the floodgates have opened with gambling, I think it's gonna be around. It might not be as hyped as it is right now. I stopped following like the Sportsnet YouTube page because I found there was just so much gambling stuff, and I was like, "Hey, not interested," right? And I know I'm not alone there either, but I think the gambling hype is gonna slow down a bit, or maybe I'm just telling myself that so I can sleep at night. But um, I don't think we're gonna see gambling removed unless we see some like big political shift or something. But gambling is gonna be sticking around in the NHL. I'm very confident of that. As for the ads on jerseys, I think some people are trying to convince themselves that this is temporary. It might not, right? Because like as long as the NHL is making money off this, why go back? I mean, you're going to obviously tick off fans, but I think with the gambling side of things, fans like me that don't gamble, I think we're going to get over it, right? Like when I see alcohol ads, I kind of just tune out. It's like, okay, well, I'm not buying it because I don't drink. I think it's going to be the same as like the gambling in the casino. I'm eventually just going to kind of like, it's just going to kind of fall to the wayside whenever I see an ad. It's just like, okay, whatever. So I don't think we'll be able to go back, and that's okay, right? As long as the NHL is making money, that's important. But is it ethical? That's what I ask you, my friends. Feel free to leave a comment. How do you feel about gambling in hockey? Do you think it's overwhelming? Do you think it's annoying? Do you think it's a good thing? If you do it yourself, do you think it's fun? And I think like the stats behind it's kind of interesting too. Like, I always think it's fun picking your Stanley Cup champion beforehand. You're usually going to be wrong, but I think that side of it could be kind of fun. So I don't know. If you enjoy gambling, let me know. What do you enjoy about it? So there you go. My verdict, though, my final verdict about whether or not I think gambling is good for hockey, if it's good for the NHL. And as you'd expect, I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't know. Again, financially, I think it's a good thing. Ethically, we'll have to wait and see. Really, we'll have to wait and see. We're obviously going to see a lot more cases of gambling addiction just because there's more people gambling now. But maybe this is a safer environment to gamble, if that makes sense. I don't know. I think it's going to be an interesting next few years to see how all of this plays out. But again, it's good for the NHL, the business. Is it good for the fans? Is it good for the people? I think that's where we have to wait and see. So there you go. Okay, so last episode yesterday, I had my little joke fantasy pick. Okay, it was a lot of fun. Haha, I'm hilarious. Here is my not joking fantasy pick for this week. Even though we got the funniest face in the NHL, I can't believe he did this again this year. But Brandon Tanev, first of all, great player. He's having a pretty good season. Wow, check out that plus minus. Jeez Louise. Brandon Tanev, forward for the Seattle Kraken. Now, he's listed as just a left wing here on this little screenshot I have, but on the Yahoo app, he's listed as a left wing / right wing. And we all know how important those players are that can play multiple positions. Left wing, right wing, left wing, center. Yeah, so anyways, he plays both wings, so he should be pretty easy to put in your lineup. Seattle, now I don't think they play next week because of the All-Star break, but they have 4 games when they come back. Pretty okay opponents too. But here's the thing. Seattle's on a road trip. Seattle is great on the road. Pick this guy up. And you might as well pick him up early before the All-Star break because it's not like anything's going to happen anyways. So be sure to keep Brandon Tanev on your radar. If he's available in your league, he probably is. He's good for points. I know he's on a little bit of a cold spell here, but again, they're on the road. I like the odds of him picking up his pace. He'll get you hits. He'll get you some pims. He'll get you some blocks, shots, obviously, as a forward, and he'll hopefully get you some points. And that positive plus minus, that plus 23 he has on the season, very good sign as well. So, you know, if you're looking for someone to help out with some of those extra categories, going just beyond the offense, he might be your guy. Now, I think the only fallback is he hasn't put up a ton of power play points. I don't even know if he plays on the power play. So might be one kind of drawback. But I would take a look at Brandon Tanev, especially in the second week of this double week. Because this coming week is 2 weeks in one because of the All-Star break. So they play there's 3 or 4 days worth of games and then the break and then a full week after that. So yeah, and once again, Seattle doesn't play in that first week, but they play 4 games in that second week. So Brandon Tanev, probably a good pickup. I recommend. And that is it for our Sunday edition of the Hockey Variety Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Crazy that we've made it to 10 episodes. I totally thought I was going to just abandon this after 1 or 2. And here we are. Still sticking with it. So thank you so much for listening. We're trying to get to 10 subscribers by the end of 2023. So if you could subscribe, stuttered a bit there. If you could subscribe to the YouTube channel, that'd be great. Be sure to leave a like. Like I said, I'm on Facebook now. We're on Instagram now. You might have to do a bit of digging to find it, but Hockey Variety Podcast on both platforms. That is the name. Don't wear it out or whatever. Hoping to drop a podcast mid this week. We will see, but I will be here on Sunday no matter what, because Sunday is the magic podcast day or whatever. So yeah, thank you so much for supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave me a bit of feedback on how you felt about this episode. And yeah, have a good week.